We're walking through the neighborhood that one of Stalin's comrades and revolutionaries also lived in, named Kamo. And there's lots of legends and stories about him, but one was that he was robbing a bank and he had been caught. And he pled to basically mental illness, stupidity, these sorts of things. Now, the cops didn't believe him, and so they said, you know what you can do? If you take a dump and you try a little bit of it, you'll have proven your mental incapacity and stupidity, and we'll let you go. And so he did just that. Legendary stuff from a legendary Georgian. And now his house was back there, but it's been torn down and replaced by a church because they're really trying to de-Sovietize the country. Well, that's the story of the legendary Gamo. Much less famous than Stalin, but pretty famous around these parts for doing things like eating his own poop. Now, through all of Georgia, they've removed statues of Lenin, Stalin, whatever street names dedicated to either of them have been removed. Names of cities gone, except in Gori, where we still have a little remembrance of them. There is a Stalin Street, there is a Stalin Avenue. Now, actually, it's a little bit difficult to even find the signs, but right here is an example of one showing that, well, there is still a Stalin Street in Gori. One of the few rare instances where you'll still see something named after the dictator from Gori. Now, when he wasn't too busy robbing trains and banks and engaging in revolutionary activities, this is where our boy Yosef lived. Now, of course, with far fewer tourists around, and it looked a little bit different. He didn't have these opulent gardens all around his home, but this was his actual house. You see that? Dom Muzej Yosifa Vissarionovича, too difficult for me to pronounce, Stalina. Stal, of course, meaning steel in Russian. That's what whenever we're always taught. Stalin, man of steel. Stalin literally means steel. In case you didn't know. A little weird that when you've got somebody who kills 18 million of his own people, that we have his house here as a tourist destination. But we people are into weird stuff. Look up there, the hammer and the sickle of the USSR. Now, of course, I have my own little bit of history with the USSR, and my entire family's from the USSR, and I was in my mother's belly during the last few months of its existence. But I was fortunate. My great-grandmother lived all the way in Siberia. And ironically, during the times of Stalin and all the purges and the gulags that existed under that regime, the farther away you were from the city center, the better off you usually were. Not that you were safe everywhere. Your neighbors would rat you out just to get you sent away, just to save their own skins. Oftentimes, ironically, to Siberia, where my great-grandmother, for example, was. But that's where you were safer and you were able to, have some sustenance, because you would have your own cows, you could get your own milk. Of course, you weren't supposed to, but you could kind of get away with it. Whereas the people in Moscow might have been starving during the World War II and other wars. Now, back in the day, probably if you had come here and you were caught hanging out, doing some shady things here, chances are you'll be off with your head. But nowadays, Georgian kids will come here, they'll play hide and seek behind here. It's a very different time here in Gori and in Georgia, since the Soviet times. Now Gori, of course, like Tbilisi, has its own Stalin museum. Oh, okay. So as you can see, by the years 1941 through 1945, this was a monument that was first erected to honor the soldiers from Georgia who had died during World War II. And before, there had been another statue up here, but it's since been replaced with this statue sort of a cross. And of course, during the USSR times, religion was banned, so you couldn't have a cross up here. And then on top of that, we've got like a sort of an in memoriam here of the people, the soldiers who had died in the wars in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Of course, from which many refugees are now residing in Georgia. Now, truth be told, there isn't too much to do in Gori. Besides, aside from what we've already seen, go to a cafe. And look at this! The tables are chained to the floors. Probably because they're very well aware of the history with Yosef and how he would steal whatever things he could get his hands on. So now, out of precaution, they chain all of their tables to the ground so that nobody can take them. And this is the rest of the streets of Gori. Although, truth be told, there aren't really that many good cafes around to go to, and not that much to do. Aside from maybe going to this salon. Yeah. But here's something you can do. For a mere 40 lari, you can get this mannequin in Gori. Cindy. That's the mannequin's name. I think I'd rather have a mannequin of Yosef. But, I mean, beggars can't be choosers for 40 lari. I feel like we've stepped back in time in Gori. Look at these old 90s looking phones. You're not gonna find those in Tbilisi. Well, all that being said, I think the Gori adventure has come to an end. So now, we gotta find a taxi, one that's over there, like a shared taxi, to head back to Tbilisi. So that's it. That's it from Gori, the place where there's not much to do, and so the only thing to do is to become a counter-revolutionary and then take over 1/4 of the entire world. And that's Gori for you. So, who knows where the next counter-revolution is going to be coming from. Peace.